Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to an edition of Mental Condition and Sports Podcast. We're excited to be back. We're excited to be able to have another conversation about the world of sports and just do it in the way that we do it. We're thinking about the mindset of athletes. We're thinking about the mindset of, we're going to be very, very interested today in the discussion that we're going to have, the mindset of a particular sport. So not necessarily the athletes in the sport, but the mindset of a particular sport. I am your host, Elliot Allen, the mental conditioning trainer. I'm excited to have you guys back with us. We're getting ready to get into it. I think this is a different approach to talking about sports. Really very profound in that sports is, most trainers, most people, coaches, they will tell you about any sport. The sport a lot of times is anywhere from 20 to 40% physical. The rest is mental. So I think that this conversation is very, very powerful to any sport. But particularly today, one of my true passions, as you can see, boxing is one of my passions. We have a lot of sports that we're going to cover. I'm just a sports junkie, but I'm also a mindset junkie. And let's match it up. Let's get busy here in the Mental Condition and Sports podcast. So today I want to talk a little bit about boxing. I want to talk about the mindset of the sport of boxing. But let me be clear and let me slow down, as I'm very excited to be able to get to this show. I'm not necessarily talking about the mindset of boxers themselves. I'm not a professional boxer. I'm not an amateur boxer. I'm not a Golden Gloves guy. We've had some opportunities to have some Golden Glove champions on here. We're going to expand that. We're going to keep getting more actual boxers in the mental conditioning gym, sports podcast. We're going to get everybody here, but I will not be so bold as to insult actual athletes. I'm very careful about that, about insulting any profession. As far as trying to get into their mindset, unless we've actually been in that realm. So I think it's very important to be careful around it. We're going to draw our conclusion with it. We're going to draw our conclusion with it, quite frankly, as a fan. But at the same time, as a fan of the sport of boxing for over 40 years, I think I have an authority to be able to speak on the mindset of the sport in general and how, frankly, it's being presented to us. So anytime I do any of my podcast interviews, I'm gonna kind of start this off the same way like I do if I'm interviewing a person. We're gonna start at the top, and then we're gonna rewind and talk about the beginning, the humble beginning, certainly from my standpoint, and bring it up to what's going on today. So let's talk a little bit about why I'm so fired up about doing this. I've been thinking about doing this show for quite some time. And it's hard because I'm very disappointed right now with the mindset and the state of my beloved sport of boxing. I'm not disappointed with the fighters. I'm not disappointed in the talent that we're having. That's something that I think I want to be very clear. Sometimes we have these conversations. I know it's always an old school mentality versus a new school mentality when we're talking about talent in any sport. But I'm not necessarily one of those guys. I think everything really more than anything is more mindset. Physically, the physical talent of us as human beings, I think is no question. Each generation, we physically get better. So I'm not going to ever really challenge the fact that a more modern day player is definitely more physically advanced than a player 20 years ago or a boxer, 20 years ago. Boxers, athletes in general, of course, with due time, we have more modern medicine. We have more modern gym facilities for them to physically work out. We have people like myself now who are mindset trainers, and athletes, boxers are utilizing us in that forum. So I think that technology, the opportunity is there for us to grow and to get better. And in a lot of sports, I think that we're taking full advantage of it. In a lot of ways, I think that we're not taking advantage of it. I think that's why we have this dispute nowadays between, athletes, boxers of 30, 40 years ago to the athletes and boxers of today. Because those of us who witnessed those fighters 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we kind of look at their IQ and the things that they had to work with, the things they had to deal with, that maybe they were not as physically gifted as an athlete today or had the physical advantages of an athlete today. But we do realize that their mindset is what able to, for us, make us feel as though, like, I think he could whip this guy from today. But we don't know that. And that's not necessarily, again, the direction I want to take. I just want to kind of talk a little bit about, again, the sport itself of boxing and what's my problem with it and what's really bothering me and what I want to see kind of change. So I think we're in a stage where boxing is really teasing us. Again, the talent is there. So that's the tease that, on a given weekend, you can have, a Shakur Stevenson going against a Teofimo Lopez. That's a throwback, leading up to that. That was a throwback, the excitement of that. These are two guys, two talented young fighters in their prime, getting ready to get in the ring and get it on. I do think that, and we'll get to that, I do think that the ability to promote it nowadays is different. And that's part of the mindset of the sport of boxing today, and that has to be worked on. We'll get to that. But those are teasers. And then when they get into the ring, just the fact of seeing two guys at the top of their game, in their prime. One guy's not 38, 39 years old. No disrespect to a guy like Terrence Crawford, who's in his 37, 38 years old, getting to the ring. He's still top dog in the game, but it's still nothing like seeing a guy who's 24, 25, 26 years old getting in the ring against another guy who's 25, 26, 27 years old, really in the prime of their physical abilities. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like a build up to that. And then we'll get that. And then from, kind of up here, you're excited about it. That particular fight, we'll talk about that at another time. The actual results of that fight, you could say it was disappointing in terms of it being somewhat of a one-sided fight. We were looking for a little bit more from Teofimo. But at the same time, just the event of it had me up here. Like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly what I miss. And then after the event's over, not that event withstanding, but just after that fight is over, that promotion is over, you just kind of feel like we went down. Because it's numerous weeks that go by without, obviously there's boxing on every week, but let's be honest, there's just certain fights that you have. This is just business in general. You have to build up your superstars. You have to build up your characters of the sport. And you have to have that continuation of those fighters fighting on a daily basis to build the mindset of the sport, to build the mindset of the fans watching that sport of boxing. And that's the part that I think that we're really, that's where we're at. We're in such a tease mode. Yeah, we got this one. Also go way down here. Oh, and then they'll come back up. Okay, cool, we got this. Then they go way down here. Okay, we got this one. It can't be that way. And it's very hard to deliver fans, true fans that's going to stick to the sport of boxing for a long time to come, for generations to come. The guys that came up in my generation watching boxing, and even before that, my father's generation, these were people that are just fanatics of the sport. We'll travel anywhere in the world, as I have, to go to a boxing match. We'll pay whatever it is to watch a boxing match at home if I can't make it on pay-per-view. Things like pay-per-view was never a problem for me. It's still not a problem for me. Even sometimes when I'm kind of like, what are they doing? I still press the button because I'm a true fan of the sport and I want to support the fighters the best that I can. But still, the mindset of the sport as it's going down from generation, I think is becoming a little bit of an issue. So that's where I want to kind of touch on and kind of get onto what has happened to our beloved sport of boxing, not the talent. The talent is there. You name it. It's a plethora of talent. We still got outstanding guys at 140, 147. You got your Tank Davises. You got your Shakur Stevensons, your Teofimo, Abdullah Masons, Shushu Carrington. All of these young guys that are coming up. If I miss you, believe me, I don't want to get, that's not what this is about. I don't want to get into all of that, so don't kill me. If I didn't miss you, of course, we got the Mexican Monster coming up. My guy, I love David Benavidez, my favorite fighter at this particular time, one of my favorite fighters. You have all of these guys out there that are willing to do what they have to do in the sport, and the talent is there for those guys. But I feel a certain sense of disappointment for those guys because we want to make sure that they're getting their piece of the pie, they're getting their just due, they're getting in there and having the competitive fights that the fans want to see. So what has happened? What has happened? To me, once again, it's a mindset thing. So that's the top. So let's go all the way back and kind of rewind it and understand that, frankly, the way I see it, that boxing right now mentally is missing a gear. A gear is missing. What's going on? What is that gear? Where did it come from? So I can speak on, again, my era of watching boxing. I have to go back to probably, you always see that question. People say, well, what was the fight that really, grabbed you into boxing? I was watching boxing probably towards the very end of the Muhammad Ali. One of the fights I actually remember watching was Muhammad Ali versus Trevor Berbick, which he lost. But I remember watching because I knew who Muhammad Ali was, and I remember the excitement of the event. What Muhammad Ali created in boxing was the excitement of the event. And that's the first thing that captured me. Like, you anticipate how Muhammad Ali's going to be fighting. I was so young I was very young at the time when that fight happened that I really didn't know anything about boxing, but I knew the event, the excitement of the event. That was a powerful thing about that particular night. Just the excitement. I was like, oh, this is going to, you anticipated for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, whatever it is, 2 months. And then it finally happens. My dad was probably talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. So you're excited to see that. Do I remember anything that happened in that fight? No, but I do remember watching the fight. Do I know what was going on? Absolutely not. But that right there shows me the mindset of the sport. Of that they were able to capture a young guy like myself who probably was maybe about 5 years old at that point when that fight happened. If I was that old, it still captured me. Not in the sense that it would capture me a little bit later on down the line. Probably the fight that captured me really, really, really later on down the line that I was actually conscious of and I had an opportunity to watch it. At this time, I didn't have cable. We didn't have cable. They didn't have cable in my area, so it was torture. These fights would come on, so we didn't have HBO to watch. We didn't have access to closed circuit. There was no cable. We couldn't get it. But what they did, the first fight again that captured me though was I knew about Ray Leonard and Tommy Hearns. I knew about Tommy Hearns and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. That was one of the fights. That one, along with Ray Leonard and Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Those two fights for me was the fights that really just made me just say, hold it. There's something about this. There's something special about this. Probably would have to say Hagler, Hearns, obviously was before Hagler and Leonard. So probably Hagler, Hearns was probably that first fight. Everybody knew about that fight. Everybody was anticipating that fight. But once again, that was not a fight that I was able to see live. So I still wasn't able to experience that feeling of watching it live. But when I did have an opportunity to watch it, I remember sitting there like, oh my God, the anticipation of it. But yet these guys, as everybody knows, one of the most action-packed fights in the history of the sport, certainly on that level. We kept it up here. We kept it up here. And they don't really go back down. The fights kept coming. But again, you keep in mind, I'm young at that point, so I don't really understand at that point, the level of, okay, we had that fight. What was next? I don't really understand that. All right, at this point for me, I'm just developing my love for the sport. Then you had Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvelous Marvin Hagler. I was greatly stimulated by that. And again, I was unable to watch it live, but watch this. I'm going to show you again the mindset of the sport, of the people who were running the sport. The tape came out, and it was in video stores. So the video stores bought that fight, and it was bought out, distributed in video stores. So if you went to like Blockbuster, whatever your local was called, it was called Video Quest. They had the actual fight. We rented the fight and I watched it. And I remember watching that fight over and over again and watching that tape over and over again because what they did was the backstory. When it started, they gave you the press conference. They gave you clips of the press conference. They showed you, the fighters. They showed the fighters talking. That was, to me, the mindset of boxing. They showed you, wow. You saw Ray in the press conference. You saw him talking about his eye at that moment, that him coming back, just only coming back for this one fight. And anytime you saw Marvelous Marvin Hagler talking, his passion for just being a rough customer and wanting to fight was so very powerful to me. And it struck me. The mindset of boxing right there was what grabbed me. Fast forward to when we have cable now. I have HBO now. This is where, to me, the mindset of boxing really developed. Right here. I was at the Boxing Hall of Fame this year, and they have a auction. And when I saw this, I said, there ain't no way I can't get this. I don't care how much it is. I couldn't sleep. I put my bid in on this, and they said, okay, come back in the morning, make sure your bid is still in. Man, I didn't even sleep. I was up there that next day as soon as the doors opened to see if I was able to get this. So this jacket means a lot to me. They said it was actually one of the producers of HBO Boxing who actually owned this jacket. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was told. But I'm just so excited to display this jacket. It means a lot to me because HBO, the heart and soul of boxing, to me, is the mindset of boxing that I saw that built really what the legacy that they're still riding off of today. And I'm going to address that up and down, up and down, up and down. What HBO did, the mindset of HBO, the mindset of Ross Greenberg, who actually, again, entered the Hall of Fame this year. He is an executive at HBO, and I know him very, very well because I was just so enthralled with the mindset of boxing. So it was an honor. It was a lot of great fighters this year, that got inducted. The great Manny Pacquiao was there. The great Michael Nunn was there. Some of my favorite fighters of all time were there. But at the same time, believe it or not, Ross Greenberg was somebody that I was excited to see because he is HBO boxing and he played such a role in that. And to me, he played such a role in the mindset of boxing because what HBO, in my opinion, did was they kept that plateau going this way. They were on every Saturday for at least 3 Saturdays out of the month. And at some point, they kind of not partnered with them, but business-wise, they understood. Showtime was in the game too. And then Showtime had the first Saturday of every month. So HBO said, okay, cool. You know what? Y'all take that. And HBO took the other 3 Saturdays, which to me was smart business and the mindset of boxing that we have to work together to keep the sport up here and not let it keep dipping down because we're up here and we're going back down here. HBO had a roster. Look it up. Look on Google your phone and any point in the 90s, look at their roster of fighters. They had it all. They had all of these fighters. Sometimes I forget, just the guys that, you kind of forget about, but the guys, unsung heroes, like guys like Winky Wright, Fernando Vargas, David Tua. These guys were outstanding fighters, and they really carried a lot of HBO broadcasts. They were headlining these shows outside of the mega stars like obviously Evander Holyfield. Tyson was there. Floyd Mayweather was there. People don't realize that that's really the groundwork of Floyd Mayweather. People like Angel Manfredi. A lot of boxers that people don't really give a whole lot of credit to, but they were big names at that particular time that it allowed HBO to stay up here and not keep dipping down because they divided it up perfectly. Tito Trinidad, Oscar De La Hoya, Ike Corte, I'm mixing all of the different names in there, but all of these people was on there. The great Pernell Whitaker was considered to be, one of the, not considered, he was pound for pound the best fighter in the world. Meldrick Taylor comes out of there. Julio Cesar Chavez, all of these particular fighters. Some of these guys ended up jumping over to HBO, Showtime, but it doesn't matter because, again, they were on in successive weeks. So it still kept, hold the line up here. And it didn't allow that thing to dip up and down and dip up and down. It held the line up here. So what HBO did, which was brilliant, was they really had a beautiful schedule to where they matched these fighters up. Lennox Lewis, Tommy Morrison, George Foreman, all of these guys, they matched it up perfectly to where every week for 52 weeks pretty much out of the year, HBO boxing was on. And when it was on, they had guys on there that, you was excited to see. Sometimes it'd be a guy that was just maybe a drop in the pot because he got hot. He whipped somebody that was like, oh, we can't believe he won. Hasim Rahman, when he knocked out Lennox Lewis. If I didn't mention Lennox Lewis also carried for a long time. When he knocked out Lennox Lewis, okay, now Rahman, you excited to see these guys because they were built up. How can I forget? Prince Nassim Hamed. How could I forget? Kevin Kelly. I can keep going as I'm talking. These names just going to keep coming to you. How can you forget? Eric Morales. How could you forget? Marco Antonio Barrera. These were all fighters that were on during the same era. Roy Jones Camp, he had Derek Smoke Gaynor. You had all of these particular guys that were out there and they were carrying shows. This is a big deal. These guys were carrying shows. And so to be able to schedule those things week after week after week, boxing never had a dip. If anything, it stayed up here, and then sometimes it went all the way up here because now you had a big pay-per-view. You had Evander Holyfield. You had Riddick Bowe. I forgot. The list goes on and on. So you had Evander Holyfield fighting Riddick Bowe. So now when we're all the way up here, when you have a fight like that, we're going up here. Evander fought George Foreman. We're going up here. That was creating a mindset for the sport that you were not getting garbage. And I don't want to be disrespectful to say we're getting garbage now, but it's just the mindset of how we're feeding the sport, or how we're presenting the sport, the presentation of the sport. And I give a lot of credit, for me, to HBO boxing. I know that is a little bit of a challenge, and some of my guys that I spoke to who are in the sport, and we've had these conversations. We had the great Brian Adams, the great Golden Glove champion Brian Adams on. We have Titus Williams on, and we talked about that. Particularly with Brian, we talked about HBO, and he talked about his concerns with HBO. He was obviously in the mix at that time, and I understand what he's saying, but it kind of goes with the territory of just how the business is. But to me, it's about really growing the business to stay here. Because as we stay here, at some point, that high plateau is going to get even higher. That the stand is even here. The stand is even here. But we have to understand how to continue to make that plateau up here and not keep dipping down and not teasing the sport because you're losing the sport. HBO, boxing, the heart and soul of boxing really, really did that. Even in terms of the commentators. If you think about it, during that time in the 90s and going into 2000, the voice of Jim Lampley was synonymous with boxing. When you hear Jim Lampley's voice to this day, anybody who's from that era of watching HBO, we get a little bit like, I'm like, oh my God, yo, Jim Lampley's in the building. When I used to go to the fights, you were just excited to see the HBO broadcast. There's Jim Lampley, George Foreman, Larry Merchant. We all hated Larry Merchant because of his mouth and how he talked, but he was still building the mindset of the sport. That's what it's really all about. On the Showtime side, you had Steve Albert and you had Al Bernstein. I had an honor when I was down also at the Hall of Fame to meet Al Bernstein. Great honor to be able to meet him, ask him a question about commentating and talking about the backstories. And he explained to me about these. He said, you know what? The backstories were very important. But that was part of the consistent broadcasting of boxing. That was the heart and soul of boxing, not just on HBO, but Showtime did not drop the ball. They understood how to keep that plateau up here. Even though they had only the first week of the month, they still came with it hard because they were taking fighters from HBO. They ended up getting Floyd. I think that some of that, as I was thinking about it this week, some of that I think is we're going to start to talk about, well, what happened? What happened? But I want to do my due diligence to really paint that picture of what HBO did. And them building up fighters, them building up fights, making fights kind of competitive, and building up opponents sometimes for fights. That's fair game to do that, to get the public excited. Sometimes I think they even build up people that they knew were not going to be the champion, but at the same time, they built him up the right way where we was excited to see it. You're excited to see it. They're both guys are fighting on the card. You know, eventually, guess what? They're going to clash. Jose Luis Castillo. Again, a lot of these guys, man, you take for granted of, you know, their role and how they really, really just carried the sport. You know, Timothy Bradley's a guy out there. He does a lot of commentating now, but he held his own, you know, in terms of being on HBO and the part that he represented again for the sport. Just a huge thing, and I know I'm leaving out a lot of guys, you know, from this list. But there were so many different people out there that really, again, carried the sport just even for a little small period of time that they were able to do it. The Baby Bull, Juan Diaz, so many guys that carried it, and HBO built them up the right way. So where do we kind of go wrong with that? As I said, you know, commentating, Harold Letterman, I can't not forget him. You know, his voice coming on and talking about the fights, you know, and everybody when you were there, everybody got excited just to see Harold Letterman. You know, when they throw it to Harold Letterman, what do you got? Well, you know, Jim, you know, everybody gets excited how he said, Jim, you know, 10 rounds to 2, I got Evander Holyfield. Everybody would get excited about that. But that, again, is building up the mindset of the sport of boxing. When you think about boxing today, who are those people that come to mind for us? I don't blame the people, and that's not a knock on the people that are out there, but we're going to talk about why I think that mindset is not there and why what do we have to do to try to get it back. So let's get to that piece. I think that, and this came to me a little bit this week, the beginning of the end, and it's so ironic that we're kind of going through this right now with Floyd Mayweather. You know, I don't know, you know, who knows what's going on with that. I try not to get myself into a conversation about that, his personal business of him having financial difficulties. Who knows if that's true or not. But for me, going down to Las Vegas, I spent a lot of time in Las Vegas going to see Floyd Mayweather's fights. And even to be honest with you, let me touch on that also for a second and talk a little bit about going down to Las Vegas, and just the vibe of it is different from when I first started to go to fights. The first time I ever went to Las Vegas to go see a fight was when Evander Holyfield fought Lennox Lewis the second time. I saw the fight in Vegas. I was going to fights I was going to fights at that point. So I saw the first fight here in Madison Square Garden. I was going to Atlantic City as well. But that was the first time that I went to Las Vegas. And Las Vegas is just a different vibe. The mental vibe of it is different. And when I first started going, it feels different from how it felt now. And a lot of that has to do with Floyd Mayweather. Not a knock on him. It's just what it is. When I first started going, it was really, Vegas was different in that Vegas was a high rollers feel to it. The money people was coming into town, and the true boxing hardcore fans were coming into town. And I never forget that excitement when you would fly in. Really, when you got on the plane, I was coming from New York, people that was going, it was almost like a business trip. You felt the people as they were getting on the plane, they were talking about it. Yo, Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, who you got? And people talking about it. When you got off the plane, as soon as you got off the plane, you felt, bam, it hit you in your face, Holyfield Lewis. Because you can hear the buzz and you can feel the buzz in the airport. That's the mindset, and that's powerful. And that to me translates into big time money when you're talking about it. HBO was able to capture that to me and harness all of those things. When you got off the plane, you felt it. I always take the bus over to the rental car place to pick up my rental car, and you would hear the talk about it on the bus going over to the rental car. When I got to my hotel, you could feel it. You can feel it. And people were there like, we come here to watch this fight. We ain't playing around. We ain't even here to party. Don't get me wrong. People party is Las Vegas. I'm not saying they didn't. But it was like, we here to watch this fight. This is business. That was the vibe of it. But over the years, when Floyd Mayweather really took things to another level financially, he's done some things that we had never seen in the sport before. You have to give him a lot of credit for that. The vibe started to change in terms of going to Las Vegas. It became more of a party situation where people would go down there and they weren't necessarily into boxing. They were just there to, hit up the Mayweather parties, the money team parties. Okay, that was, to me, a part of taking away the mindset of the boxing world. But okay, we'll deal with it. We can, that's something that could be dealt with. It was hard, but you saw the change. And then Floyd left HBO and went to Showtime. And I was thinking about today, like, what happened with HBO? I would love one day. My goal is to get one day Ross Greenberg on the show. If you're listening, man, I'm coming after you. I want you to be sitting right here to give me some real insight as to what was your thinking and what happened during that time. I'm sure he was very disappointed from his standpoint to not be able to hold on to those guys and eventually lose boxing altogether. But I feel in my mind that, and this is just my opinion, HBO earlier than I thought, until I thought about it today, they really kind of seen the handwriting on the wall of where boxing was going. And I think that they wanted no part of it. They saw the handwriting that the cost of running the sport, the cost of being able to pay for fighters was going to get to a point to where it's like, we don't really want any part of that. But it was tricky because Floyd Mayweather was one of the few, every once in a while, and we haven't seen this in a while, a fighter comes along that defies the odds of the business of boxing. And it's easy to make their fights because the amount of money is so tremendous that we don't have no real negotiation problems for the most part. Because the amount of money, Tyson had that, Oscar De La Hoya had that, Muhammad Ali had that, guys like George Foreman had, Sugar Ray Leonard had that ability to just be able to, all you got to do is you have to sign because they generate so much money in the sport that you're going to sign to fight them. Even if they telling you, listen, you're only going to get 40%, that 40% is more money than you've ever seen in any time you ever got into the ring. So there was easier negotiation. Floyd Mayweather was able to provide that, and I guess he's still trying to do that. I'm not sure if he can do that anymore, but that's why the fights were easier to make when you had a guy like him on the line. So it became tricky because I'm sure HBO was like, we generated money, but HBO was in that business for a long time, and I think that they saw the handwriting on the wall like, this is about to get out of hand. Because you started having players come into the game that were not really boxing people. People talk a lot about, I'm going to have to give a shout out here to Don King and Bob Arum. However, the business of boxing, that's another show we'll get into, is the business of boxing. It's not an organized business, and I think to a certain extent, boxers kind of want it that way, and the sport kind of want it that way, which I understand. I understand the pros and cons of that, of why boxing would want it to be that way. I do get it. I think it would be better for us to be able to have it more uniform and sort of like a league. But to me, being an old school person, that's not something I really press for because I like the rawness of it, business wise. That you know what, somebody's good at coming to the sport, y'all work it out. You know, sometimes locking yourself into a league format, it's hard because if you look at what's going on, like with the WNBA, the ladies feeling as though, you know, we're not getting the kind of money that we should get. You have labor disputes. Not that we don't have labor disputes, obviously in boxing. But at the same time, each fight is its own season. So you don't have to wait 10 years to renegotiate the contract. We negotiate the contract right here. And I think the fighters like that. I think even the business likes that because it makes it competitive. And sometimes it can up the ante and up the pot of boxing. But I think what happened was that HBO saw we have a lot of different promoters and people come into the sport that were throwing money at the sport that I think that they saw earlier than I even realized as I gave thought about it in doing this show. Earlier than we even realized that they knew we have the money, but it's going to be a disaster. And it's going to be a situation where it's going to crack the backs of certainly our company here at HBO. And it's going to crack boxing because the numbers are not going to be sustainable. Because if you think about it, like, why in the hell did they let Floyd go to Showtime? But I think that they kind of seen the handwriting on the wall because sometimes people get it twisted. And sometimes it probably was a bad breakup. And so Floyd will piss on HBO when he talks about them. But at the same time, the truth is he can't really do that because HBO was the foundation that built him. You know what I mean? His biggest foundational fights was on there. You know what I mean? When he fought Hernandez, that was one of his championship fight. That was on HBO. Angel Manfredi was a big fight for him. That was on HBO. Diego Corrales, that was on HBO. So these fights were very big in building who he was and allowing him to become that pay-per-view star. I know he tells the story and says that HBO didn't believe that he can do it. But they were monumental because those pieces, when they were just putting him on the undercard, and when I say undercards don't look like how they look today. If the undercard was just simply when HBO Championship Boxing came on, it was only 2 fights. So if they matched him up, I forget who they matched him up with, but it may be they matched him up with Roy Jones. Roy Jones was the headliner, and Floyd was the co-main event. So the undercard was always a co-main event. It wasn't no 6 fights, and you're sitting there watching 6 different fights and none of them entertaining. No, it was only 2 fights. It would be Roy, and then Floyd did his thing first. And those fights really built his legacy up. That built him up, and they put him in good fights, and he kicked ass in there, and he did what he had to do. But that's part of the real foundation of what allowed him to do what he did later and keep himself at such a high level. But I think that was the reason they saw those numbers like, yo, these numbers are crazy, and we don't want to get involved in paying that kind of money. So the truth is, now that I think about it, they probably started their descent out of the sport when they probably let Floyd Mayweather go, because Floyd was doing his thing on HBO. He was coming into his own. So it wasn't like, oh, we let him go and then he blew up. He was starting to get into it on HBO. He made that show 24/7, huge, which turned HBO Showtime, ended up having their version of it, but 24/7 is the original, backstory type of a show. Even I forget the gentleman's name that does it. His voice is so synonymous with doing those sporting backstory events. Can't ever beat that. But so HBO felt in their mind, this ain't gonna work. Let him go. HBO eventually backed out of the sport. And so when that happened, I truly believe that plateau of staying up here started to go like this. Showtime had it for a little while, so they was kind of hanging in there, but it was moving. It was fluctuating a little bit more now with Showtime. But the Showtime still had a very good roster of fighters as well, but they weren't necessarily on every week. They were just increasing their workload. They weren't on just once a month, but it still was kind of moving just a little bit more. And then when Showtime finally got out, then you just really went into just this mode of because when all of that broke, all the fighters just scattered. So you had DAZN, you had ESPN, you had at one point BET, now you have Amazon, you have Netflix, you had all different types of people that was distributed and tried to distribute boxing along the way. The problem is that doesn't work because you're unable to keep a roster of fighters to keep the plateau and hold the line up here so we can know who these fighters are, know what they're about, and then be excited to be able to see them. And I feel bad, like I said, for the mindset of boxing because the fans are not getting an opportunity to really get behind fighters. And it's sad because I know it's there. Because when we have that opportunity to see two good fighters get there, people are excited about it. Yeah, that was good. I enjoyed that. That's what's up. And then you just kind of go, brrr. I remember a story when I was down in Vegas. I was down in Vegas to see, I want to say it was Fernando Vargas and Tito Trinidad. One of the best fights I've ever seen live. That was a hell of a fight that night. And I have a cousin who lives down in Vegas, and she came that night again. They were brilliant. What they did the Friday night, that fight, obviously HBO had Fernando Vargas and Tito Trinidad on Saturday, but I don't remember if it might have been Showtime. Friday picked up, that Friday before picked up, I think, because they had Bernard Hopkins. It could have been HBO, I don't remember. But they showed that fight. It was a small card. The main fight I want to say was probably in the Mandalay Bay, and this fight was like in some back, arena. I don't even remember which arena it was. But I remember taking my cousin to that fight. And she's not a person who doesn't like sport, but she's not really a big boxing fan. I don't think that she necessarily knew who Bernard Hopkins was. I don't even remember who Bernard Hopkins was fighting. I do remember this particular person he had a couple of fights with. He got, there was a disqualification. It just was a messy fight. And I remember my cousin going to that fight that night, and again, the vibe that she felt from it, she was like, yo, this is what's up. And that to me was the mindset of boxing. Just her being in the house that night with I think David Tua fought that night, so they had a nice card. And she was like, yo, can I go tomorrow? I was like, nah, that's for the big dogs. And it was sold out, so there was no more tickets. But I'm speaking to that to say that the mindset was there, that once you grab people, it would stay up here. But we're having trouble getting it up here and getting people to stay there, because in her case, if you have somebody kind of like, oh, I'm kind of interested, it's very important not to let the pendulum go down. You have to keep it up here. So if you have a good event, you have to keep it up here. We have to be very careful. We have a lot of these events coming up. I know, again, Floyd Mayweather's talking about fighting Mike Tyson, and I love both those guys, but that's probably not something that's keeping it up here for boxing fans. For the entertainment part, cool. But there's two different elements to that. And so that's where you have to look at. We're trying to introduce that, the Jake Pauls and things of that nature. We're trying to introduce that, but you have to understand the mindset of the sport of boxing. And I go back to HBO, the heart and soul of boxing. And I believe that the blend and the formula that they set for the sport of boxing, heart and soul championship boxing, we have to get back to that. That's the piece that we're missing. That's the piece that boxing needs for the mindset of the sport of boxing. It's not the fighters, because again, we got a lot of talent out here. There's a lot of really good, talented fighters. And I would be even remiss to say that I don't even know, and I'm a boxing head, I don't even know the full extent of talent out there, because they're not being shown in the right light. You need to get these guys on to where they're being showcased along with the big fighters. Put them on the cards, and put them on the cards with they can have a pretty good fight, competitive fight, and don't load up the cards with 10 fights, because you load the fights with the card with 10 fights and 7 of them are terrible. By the time you get to 6, people are tuned out. Mentally, you're tuned out. The mindset is not there to be honed in. So now you got the guy that you're kind of co-featuring. Everybody sleep till the main event comes on. So these are the little things, but at the same time, they're big things that I think the sport needs to get back to. Can we do that? It's going to be very difficult, I think, because the distribution of sports in general has changed, in that there's no more arm like HBO. I was thinking about that today as well. We will never have another HBO, because cable programming like that is no more. I mean, HBO can't. I always have this dream in the back of my head that HBO is going to get back into it one day, but let's be honest, that's never going to happen, because people don't subscribe to HBO like that anymore, unless they hang their hat on actually saying, let's use boxing to get our subscribers back. Because I know for me personally, that was the only reason why I had HBO, and I still have it to this day. I just never got rid of it. That was the only reason why I didn't watch. Who the hell watches HBO for the movies anymore? Nobody. They did get into having, series, things like The Sopranos and The Wires and stuff like that got things like Showtime and HBO some subscribers to the popular series that they had. But a lot of people was doing it just for boxing. I know that's the only reason why I really had HBO was through boxing. And so when they lost boxing, it's kind of like, but I'm sure the amount of money that they're bringing in is very low. So they definitely cannot afford to get back into the game. So, can there be another? I mean, the zone is out there. I'm hopeful that, but it's going to have to be, I think, a coming together of the minds to understand that the business, the promoters, the fighters, they're going to have to come together and kind of get with the zone or whoever it is. If Netflix wants to buy into it like that, and they have to have a weekly show, and they don't have to load up the weekly shows again with 10 fighters, you just, as long as you're having fights on consistently every Saturday, you put 2 fights on, feature those fighters. It can be all 4 fighters. Guys, to make sure you got guys that's going to be competitive. Even the guys that lose, if they go out there and they shoot their joint real good, they're going to continue to be on. You might get a chance to see them again. There was a lot of guys on HBO that, lost, and they were the opponent. But if they went out there and they really fought hard, they got another chance to be able to come back. Guys like Kennedy McKinney, all of these guys. There was so many different, guys. Corey Spinks, Zab Judah is another guy. You know what I mean? Not that he lost, but again, he's just another guy that carried HBO for a period of time. So it's very important. He was a Showtime guy as well. But it's very important, though, that these fighters are featured properly and the sport is featured properly to where and again, it's just going to be hard simply because of the way that people watch television now. But if there's a way that boxing can figure out how to just put themselves in a spot to where people can know, every Saturday, let me just turn to this HBO boxing. Let me just turn to DAZN boxing because they get it in every night. And more than likely, when I turn there, it's going to be somebody that I heard of. And that's what HBO and Showtime was able to do. When you turn there on a Saturday night at 10 o'clock, 9:45 start, there's not only going to be boxing on, but it's going to be a person that we know who they are. It can't always just be a complete unknown. It's going to be somebody on there that we know who they are, and I don't have to sit there for 5 or 6 hours to get to the person that I know. The person that I know, as soon as it comes on, they're going to be the next fight. So, okay, cool, no problem. And then the guy that's on before them, I think I heard of him the last time. Oh, I definitely want to see him again. So that's the mindset of the sport, that the sport has to go back and reinvest in itself. And hopefully it could do that. I look forward to that happening. I don't know how it's going to happen. I'll do my part. I'm trying to do shows like this to do my part to kind of put pressure on the sport to say, let's do this. Let's make it happen. Let's start to get these fighters in there. I'm looking to meet as many fighters as I can to get their take on that and see, how do you think we can get back into the game? And for those of you guys that are out there that are just like me, they're just fanatical fans of the sport, what do you guys think? How do you guys think that the sport of boxing can rejuvenate itself mindset-wise to be able to distribute to the public? I'm looking forward to you guys' responses. Get your responses down here. Give me your DMs, and let's if you want to do another podcast together, we can all sit down and talk about it. But I think it's very important for those of us that really understand the sport. We're suffering out here because it's truly a great pastime for us. It's truly something out there that we love to do, and we have great passion for it. And I always say, yes, the money is actually there because the fanatical guys do pay for it. But at the same time, I'll end it by saying we do have to be careful because we can't overprice the sport. I think that's one of the things that I think why HBO is kind of sitting back right now, and the executives are kind of like, yeah, we're glad. We don't have no regrets about getting out of it because clearly in some cases it's just the money is getting out of hand. And it doesn't benefit anybody because the fighters are not even getting paid. I think, again, I don't want to get into it, but it seems even, if Floyd Mayweather is coming back now, one thing is factual. The man is suing Showtime for $350 million. Obviously, things happened that he didn't get his money. And so that's one of those things, again, I was HBO's looking at it like, yeah, we know he wasn't going to get his money because those numbers that get thrown out there, a lot of times as fans, we just assume like, yeah, they're definitely going to have it. But that's not, you think about it, we sit down and really think about the money and how money gets distributed. It's just because they get into the ring is not going to automatically be a $100 million fight. How really is these fights happening? And particularly if we're not having the same fan base that we're having, how are you going to make, guys are asking for a lot of money nowadays to get into the ring. The fan base is not the same. And the fan base that is coming, they're not fanatical. When I started going to boxing, it was nothing for us to, I don't know if we would say embarrassed or whatever, but the price didn't matter. We would go to the fights. If you had it, guys was easily spending $2,000 to go sit ringside. And we weren't people who were, well off with money. We just, you know what? I'm going to make it happen. This is just what we did. But a lot of times if you don't have that type of mindset about it, you're not going to spend that kind of money. Like $2,000, that's not happening. So how are we getting that money in the sport? How are we generating that money in the sport? All of that goes into the mindset of the sport. It can be rejuvenated, but how do we do that? How do we do that? My name is Elliot Allen. This is the Mental Conditioning Sports Podcast in the Mental Conditioning Gym. Let's have that discussion. Let's have that discussion. Everybody have a great week. We'll talk about it. And we're gonna keep going across the gamut and talk about other sports. The mindset of basketball. The mindset of the sport of bowling. You see, I got my bowling balls down here. These are not mine. These are my son's. So I'll probably have them on here to talk about the mindset of that sport. I've been watching bowling for also about 40 years. So that's also a sport that I'd like to see come up and go to a different level of, just the interest. In basketball, that's another story. We'll be here for another 2 hours if I start getting into that one. But everybody have a great day. Elliot Allen.